And that's point number 4, be Jesus. If you turn to 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 21. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 21. He says, "For this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us as an example that you should follow in his steps." Have you ever really thought on those words, "For this you were called"? When you call someone, how do you call them? You speak, don't you? You call out. And we started off by saying, "at his word." And this is his word to us. He's calling us to follow his example that he's left for us. And we're called to go forward and to be Jesus to, to all our neighbours and to follow his example. And Peter also gives us some further help if you turn just to chapter 3 and verses 8 and 9. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verses 8 and 9. And he says, "Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers. Be tender-hearted. Be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing." Here again, this is what we are called to do, called by the Lord to be this. We are called to move forward together in unity, to be loving, tender-hearted, to be courteous. Isn't courtesy missing in the world these days? People are so rude and pushy. We're to be courteous to each other. And if someone does something wrong to us, we're not to return it back to them, but rather we're to be a blessing to them. And this is not just meant for us towards each other. This is meant to be, too, for those who are our neighbours. Because we are to love our neighbours just as we love ourselves. And our neighbours are anyone who, in the name of Jesus, we need to show mercy to. Remember what it said in Micah 6. We're to love mercy and walk humbly before our God. And in this, I know we need to be alert from the trap of Satan, which would turn our motives into helping our neighbours into one of reward for ourselves. We need to be careful we don't fall into the category of earning ourselves brownie points in the sight of God. That's not walking humbly before God. Walking humbly before God is leaving yourself out of the picture. We are to be Jesus. And if you turn then to Matthew chapter 25 and verses 31 to 40. Matthew chapter 25 and verses starting at verse 31. "When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. And then the king will say to those on his right hand, 'Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.'" You know, there's a story told about this, and it's called The Shoemaker's Dream. One of the most beautiful of all Christian stories was told by the American poet Edward Markham about a cobbler, a godly man who made shoes in the old days. And one night the cobbler dreamed that the next day Jesus was coming to visit him. The dream was so real that he got up very early the next morning and hurried to the woods, where he gathered green boughs to decorate his shop for the arrival of so great a guest. And he waited all morning, but to his disappointment, his shop remained quiet, except for an old man who limped up to the door, asking to come in for a few minutes of warmth. And while the man was resting, the cobbler noticed that the old fellow's shoes were worn through. Touched, the cobbler took a new pair from his shelves and saw to it that the stranger was wearing them as he went on his way. Throughout the afternoon, the cobbler waited, but his only visitor was an elderly woman. He had seen her struggling under a heavy load of firewood, and he invited her in too, into his shop to rest. And then he discovered that for 2 days she'd had nothing to eat, and he saw to it that she had a nourishing meal before she went on her way. And as night fell, the cobbler heard a child crying outside his door. The child was lost and afraid, and the cobbler went out and soothed the youngster's tears, and with the little hand in his, he took the child home. And when he returned, the cobbler was sad. He was convinced that while he'd been away, he had missed the visit of the Lord. Now he lived through the moments as he'd imagined them. He imagined the knock and the latch being lifted, the radiant face and the offered cup, and he would have kissed the hands where the nails had been and washed the feet where the spikes had entered. And then the Lord would have sat and talked to him. And in his anguish, the cobbler cried out, "Why is it, Lord? Why have you forgotten that this was the day? Why are you delaying?" And then, soft in the silence, a voice was heard. "Lift up your heart, for I kept my word. 3 times I came to your friendly door. 3 times my shadow was on your floor. I was the man with the bruised feet. I was the woman you gave food to eat. And I was the child on the homeless street." You see, the challenge for all of us this year is going to be, are we willing to listen to God's voice at thy word? Are we willing to start from where we are, each one of us now, and united go forward, to be Jesus to our neighbours? Or are we going to choose to stay where we are, where it is familiar and safe? Let's choose now to make our lives matter and go forward, to be Jesus to all we meet day by day, to be ready, as was the shoemaker, to help those who came to him and needed mercy. And let us not be one of those who are like these. I was hungry, and you formed a humanities club to discuss my hunger. Thank you. I was imprisoned, and you crept off quietly to your chapel to pray for my release. That's nice. I was naked, and in your mind you debated the morality of my appearance. What good did that do? I was sick, and you knelt and thanked God for your health, but I needed you. I was homeless, and you preached to me of the shelter of God's love, but I wish you'd taken me home. I was lonely, and you left me alone to pray for me. Why didn't you stay? You seem so holy, so close to God, but I'm still very hungry, lonely, cold, and still in pain. Does it matter? Let's all decide this year that we will make a difference, that we will go forward at his word and be as he calls us to be, to show mercy to those who are in need.